wealth creation study. This study is indeed unique in the sense that it looks back at some of the wealth creators of the past, and it is also forward-looking in the sense that it explores equity investing concepts which can be applied to the future. The study is basically split in two parts. The first part is statistical, which talks about the biggest, fastest, and the most consistent wealth creators. The second part explores an aspect of equity investing. Over the last this is the 24th study, over the last 23 studies, several equity concepts have been explored by Mr. Agarwal, and some of them have been landmark in nature. He was the first to talk about the $1 trillion economy concept. Similarly, the previous year's study was around valuation frameworks, and this was the first time someone had explored valuation in such great depth. This year's study is also indeed unique in the sense that this is the first time he'll be exploring the aspect of management quality in investing and the sharp practices that one needs to watch for. These 24 studies have formed the bedrock and the foundation for the QGLP philosophy, which is practiced across all the managed products of the asset management company. Once the study is presented, we will also have a panel discussion with eminent experts who will further explore certain aspects of the study in greater depth. So to present the wealth creation study, we have with us Mr. Ramdev Agarwal, Chairman of Motilal Oswal Financial Services. He's obviously a figure who needs little introduction. He's lived, breathed Indian equities over the last 3 decades, and he's the powering force behind our research capabilities. So without further ado, I invite on stage Mr. Ramdev Agarwal to present the 24th Wealth Creation Study. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, friends. It's really an honor, and it's really fun to see all of you here. And it's a culmination of 2.5 months of effort to complete this study and put it up in front of you. So, friends, really welcome to Motilal Oswal Tower and to this presentation of 24th Wealth Creation Study. So this year we have chosen a subject which is very dear to my heart, but we have been avoiding it for a very long time. In QGLP components, quality, growth, longevity at reasonable price, quality is made up of great business run by great management. So we have done tons of studies on great businesses, but we have not tried to look at the quality of management because it was not quantitative, it was very qualitative. And typically, doing a study with a lot of text and going through the theory and other things was difficult. So we were avoiding it, though the importance of management was never less. 0 multiplied by 1 or 1 multiplied by 0 is equal to 0. So absence of management was, of course, nothing happens without the presence of management. So studying management was very important. And we'll take it up to tell you a little later. In management integrity is the most important of the 3 components: management integrity, competence, and energy. Management integrity is one thing which is 0 or 1. So we'll talk a little more about that. But this entire study is only around that, and understanding sharp practices, the accounting practices, how you can see those practices in the books of accounts. So this study is completely dedicated to this particular subject. The study presentation has 2 parts. First part is the wealth creation findings. In last 5 years, what has happened in the corporate world, what kind of companies have created wealth, what are the companies which have lost money, and which segment of the corporate world is doing well. So that's a statistical thing which we keep doing for so many years. And then second part is the theme itself. So let's come to what is wealth creation. Wealth creation is concept of wealth creation is the process by which the management enhances the value of the capital entrusted by shareholders to the management. You typically give, like to Bajaj Auto, you might have given 2-3 crores way back in 1962, and today it is worth 1 lakh crore. Or you gave 50 crores to Infosys in 93, and today it is worth 3 lakh crores plus dividends. So the concept of wealth creation is the magical thing which managements do with the money, and this is the biggest game in town, and this is the finest way of creating wealth not only for the companies but for the nations also. Net wealth created is a concept change in the market cap over the study period, that is 2014 to 2019, adjusted for the corporate actions like equity dilution, share buyback and things like that. So in last 5 years, between 14 and 19, the total amount of wealth created is 49 lakh crores, which is by far the record in terms of amount of wealth created by top 100 companies in the corporate world. The pace of wealth creation is about 22% for these 100 companies, whereas the index itself has done at about 12%. So there is a clear outperformance about 10% per year by these companies over the index. So we have put these 100 companies which are the largest wealth creators, and we have also put another filter in last 4-5 years. That is, if the company has created wealth of large amount but has not beaten the index, we have removed them. Because if a large company does 3% or 4% and it creates 1 lakh crore in last 5 years, it is of no value unless it beats the index. So there are a lot of large companies which have missed out. I think this time two companies which I remember, SBI and ITC, they have not made it to the list because they have not beaten the index. Index has done 12%, whereas these companies have done maybe 10 or 11%. So we have put them in 3 buckets: biggest wealth creators, fastest wealth creators, and most consistent wealth creators. So which are the biggest ones? Like Reliance. There's the most staggering amount of wealth creation. It is 5,65,000 crores. 5,63,000 crores in last 5 years at the rate of 24%. So not only the quantum of wealth created is massive, it is also the pace at which it has created. It is literally tripled in last 5 years. So current about 10 lakh crores, it must have been about 3 lakh crores 5 years back, and now it is about 10 lakh crores. HDFC Bank has again grown at about 25%, again tripled, and it has created 4 lakh crores of wealth. TCS has created another 3.65, slightly slower. So even elephants can dance in the sense that they have created the rate of 22%, and these large companies, the list doesn't change. I mean, there's not too many changes in the names of the companies. Of course, there are 2-3 new companies enter in here, but basically they remain very, very stable. The fastest wealth creating, this is what a lot of retail shareholders and people come here for the excitement of speed. They look for these kind of stocks in their portfolios, but because of the speed kills also. You know, I mean, the companies which come to this category, they also meet with an accident because of sheer speed. The growth, the pace of growth they somehow show and manufacture rather. And that creates a problem eventually leading to sharp practices about which we'll talk about. So India Bulls venture is the second time that it has made it, and we have in the report we have given the history of all the fastest growing companies, and the story is not very good. And in this time, Bajaj Finance is one company which is there in the largest wealth creating companies as well as the fastest wealth creating companies. And return from this segment is about 60-61% compounded compared to 12% for the index. So obviously people want some flavor of this fastest growing companies in their portfolio. 1 or 2 of them in your portfolio and it can change the complete color of your portfolio. We know a lot of large investors, successful investors are made up of these 1 or 2 fastest growing companies. I know in Pune, Bajaj Finserv and Bajaj Finance is the one which is ruling the entire Pune portfolios. So, I mean, a lot of people have made a lot of money in these companies, and that has made the, and I have been personally been a beneficiary of this. So it has changed the entire portfolio performance, forget about the stock performance. But I think the real pride of place is the most consistent wealth creating companies list. Here, when I saw the list, I was surprised to see, pleasantly surprised to see that IndusInd Bank has done 49% compounded for 10 years. This is not a 5-year list. This is the list of 10 years compounded. IndusInd Bank 49%, Pidilite, Titan 40%. I mean, 40% means doubling in 2 years, 49 means literally doubling in 1.5, 1.6 years. So, I mean, at this pace and such high quality companies they have done, if you see all the companies, whether it is Titan, Shree Cement, Asian Paints, Kotak, we have, what we did, we looked at the 10-year back list of these consistent wealth creating companies, and what we found is that index has done 12%, but these companies, if you just buy them equal weight, without choosing anything, still it has done about 17, 18%. So if you buy these 10 companies, though they look to be expensive, I think 5 to 7 years or 10 years henceforth, you will not regret. You will definitely beat the index. And many fund managers, but you have to just not apply your mind, what is good, what is bad, buy these companies and hold on. The sectors which have really contributed to this wealth creation is banking and finance. It has done about 32% of all the wealth created. I mean, of the 49 lakh crores, 1/3 has come from banking and finance. And the story is that of value migration. This story will continue, and it has been continuing for a long time. And I think till government companies, government banks, they remain 60-65% of the system. I think you have very good chance to win in this particular, the banks and the NBFCs and the insurance companies, asset management companies, those which are in private sector and extremely well managed, those entities will keep winning big time. So banking finance, I think, is going to remain right at the top, whether it is 32% or 25% in the years to come. Consumer has always been a beneficiary of wealth creation. They have, I mean, I think entire 24 years, this is one particular segment which has never been missing from the stack. Technology and oil and gas, thanks to Reliance, oil and gas is doing very well. Technology has come back to 12%. I think this 10, 12%, 15% technology contribution is going to continue. I think auto has taken a beating because of slowdown. I think that will come back and will become a little larger share of the post-March. I think there will be recovery. Then you have the telecom, which is literally zero. So there will be a sector churn from here onwards. I think in next 5 years, we are going to, from this slowdown to the next 5 years or 7 years, you are definitely going to see, you can have your own pick of the sectors which are going to win. But I'm quite sure 1 or 2 sectors which are down and kind of below or out, those sectors will come back and make way for wealth creation. This is the story of PSUs. I mean, they have been wealth destroyer. At some point of time in 2004-05, if you see, almost 51%, the red line, 51% was, the wealth was created, 51% of all the wealth was created by PSUs. And I think Mr. Ramesh Damani was one of the biggest beneficiary of this particular trend at that point of time. And he still keeps hoping that it will come back. From this 8, 9, it will go to 50%. And so he can make yet another round of killing. So, now the evidence is little difficult. They are down, and now even government is giving up, and then finally they are getting rid of these companies. So it's your call. I think only 6% of the wealth created is from PSUs, and I mean now it is literally out of the scene in terms of wealth creation. This is one chart which is very interesting. This is emergence of the private sector. The real story of India in wealth creation in the stock market is emergence of the private enterprises like Infosys, TCS, Wipro, Sun Pharma, your Bajaj Finance or HDFC Bank. I mean, these new entities which came up in last 20-25 years, they have created the largest amount of wealth. Of course, Reliance is slightly older. They're right at the front. But the other entities which was born in 90s, early 90s, post-liberation, they are doing a fantastic job. So earlier it used to be 40-50% private sector. Now 73% of all the wealth created is from private sector companies. About 14% is from public sector, and MNCs are another 14-15%, 17%. And both these pies are kind of shrinking. So private sector is there, and that's where the biggest innovation and wealth creation is going to happen. There is a funny thing here. What happens is that every company, there is a ranking in the market. We had done one study about the ranking of the market. And what happens is that the names of the companies keep changing, but the rank are stacked in a particular, there is some method in the madness, how you call it 1, 2, 3, 4 in the largest wealth creating companies. So the rank number 1 in 2014 was TCS, and that time its market cap was 4,16,000 crores. Today, rank number 1 is Reliance, which is 8,63,000 crores in March. So to maintain the rank, you have to grow at 16%. The company can change, but to maintain the rank in top 100, you have to grow at 16%. This is the most predictive tool to say what will be the size of number 1 company in 2025. It will be more like 20 lakh crores. It will happen. I don't know what will be the name of that company, but it will be 18 to 20 lakh crores in 2025, if you just extrapolate. And for the lower ranks, actually require 20 to 25% growth per annum to stay there, because the company is coming from behind, they are pushing you to stay there. So it is very important, this ranks, the moment ranks change upward or downward, you can see the wealth creation in the companies. These are last few slides about the valuation. One of the observation I have seen in last 24 years, that till about 2015, if you buy low P multiple, you are guaranteed of making money. But now, yes, the below 10 P multiple, there are some 27 companies, but of the 100, only 30% of wealth are created, and the rate of growth for these companies, pace of wealth creation is about 32%. So clearly, if you are successfully buying some low P multiple companies, it does make a difference. But after that, I mean, say like once you cross that 10 P multiple, if you look at the rest of the 75 companies, it doesn't matter at what price you bought. It is absolutely insensitive to the P multiple. You bought it 70 P multiple, 40 P multiple, 20 P multiple, the rate of return is about 20 to 23%. So market has completely changed in color in terms of, so people who are looking at 2 multiple, 3 multiple, 4 multiple, they have a far more challenging times, at least in last 4 years. I'm not saying it is going to continue, but buying cheap is not the way to make money. Same way in payback ratio, payback ratio means basically current market cap divided by next 5 years aggregate profits forward. So if you are able to buy for less than 1 payback, clearly 1 payback means less than 5 years of payback, so you are making fantastic amount of money. And I'm surprised even this ratio is not working anymore. You bought it for anything more than 1, so 5 years, above 5 years, whether payback ratio is 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, rate of return is same about 21, 22%. So again, no valuation parameters are working in terms of whether this is the way to buy. Probably market is saying that there is earnings growth and let me buy at any price. You know, so it is about quality and growth at any price. That's the kind of situation it is looking to be. The PEG ratio is looking a little more sensible, but here again, once you pay more than 1.5 PEG, then it doesn't matter at what price you're buying the stocks, because till about 1.5, so if your growth rate is 20%, you buy up to 30p or 35p, it works, but beyond that, it's all about 20% return on the equity. So I think post 2015, once the earnings growth, general earnings growth have slowed down, markets have become completely agnostic to the valuation and gone about the quality and growth. And when there is a quality and growth, market says that price doesn't matter. And that's how market has been working. I hope it continues for some more time. Then this list of wealth destruction. I mean, right at the top is Vodafone. I mean, it is actually Idea. If you actually put Vodafone and Idea, probably number will be double of this. But since Vodafone was not listed, the market cap loss of Idea is about 1 lakh crore, which is quite staggering. And then you have a few Tata Motors, again because of JLR, and a few PSUs, and some financials also. Financials, they're not coming because they're a little smaller, but a lot of financials have lost a lot of market cap. So that was the part of what really happened in last 5 years. In the study itself, we have given a lot more data in terms of operating cash flow, free cash flow, and aggregate profits and all. But let's come to the main theme of the study, that is management integrity, understanding sharp practices. So there is, So account books are, language of the entrepreneur. It is a language of commerce. So you communicate with your stakeholders, not only shareholders, but auditors, regulators, bankers, to everybody through your accounts. And so this document called balance sheet is very important. And there is only one way of writing honest books. And there are infinite millions of ways of writing manipulated accounts. When you want to write dishonest accounts, there is always a new way of writing bad accounts. But there is only one way, one right way of writing the books. So this is the kind of, you are throwing arrow all over. That's like a bad accounts, but there is only one bullseye for the good accounts. So why this study on management integrity? In evaluating a common stock, the management is 90%. Integrity, so industry or the business is about 9%, and all other factors are 1%. This is said by Phil Fisher in 1960 in his book. So winning is nice if you don't lose your integrity in the process. This is the biggest problem. What market is banking on is winning at any cost. So their market is betting on winning, and at times market is not able to figure out whether this winning is good or bad. And till it is known as it is bad, market is very charitable in kind of giving a lot of value or price to the winning. But winning is not nice, or it is a race to zero despite winning if it is not with lot of integrity. So in the QGLP process, as I said, the quality of manager is extremely important, because quality of business is dependent on quality of a company is function of quality of business and quality of management. So this particular portion was not studied, so we are coming back to study quality of management. And management you can study on 3 parameters. Buffett said that to evaluate any management, you have to have 3 things. One is unquestionable integrity, demonstrated competence, and growth mindset. So passion and competence, these 2 are very clearly statistically, and you can see in the companies. But integrity is something which is not visible, and you find it very difficult to figure out whether the managements have the highest possible integrity or not. And most smartest of the guys, they are also caught by this. Last year, even Warren Buffett was struck by one of the windmill company defrauding Berkshire Hathaway by $325 million. One single shot and they lost $325 million. So even most smartest of the guys, they are fooled by this lack of integrity. So it is very important to figure out how to, so this study has been dedicated not only to understanding management, but management integrity only. So what is integrity? Integrity is practice of being honest and showing consistent adherence to moral and ethical principles and values. What is management integrity? That was the integrity. What is the management integrity? Honesty and sense of trusteeship towards all stakeholders, not only shareholders, but all the stakeholders. Like to shareholders, presenting a true and fair view of company's affairs through annual accounts, maintaining and having a rational dividend policy to suiting all the shareholders. To the employees, courtesy and respect for all the employees, and giving fair share of the company to all the employees through the options and through the compensation. Then the customers, offering products of the highest quality at the best possible prices, and retaining customers through appropriate loyalty programs. So whether management has integrity through all the stakeholders, governments, are you paying your taxes on time? Are you fighting with the government? So those things you have to, and the community, whether you are sensible to the community and other aspects of CSR. So it is important that you can see all of this through the management actions. But most importantly, the accounts of the companies are extremely important, and they tend to show you the integrity in its finest way. So Buffett says, in looking for people to hire, I mean, here we are saying management, look for three things: integrity, intelligence, and energy. And if they don't have the first, if they don't have integrity, the other two will kill you, because they are passionate and competent. If if you let loose these guys without integrity, they can kill you. So I think it is extremely important to check first the integrity of the management rather than bothering about it after buying the stock. Then what happens is there is a confusion between integrity and competence. You know, what happens is that many times most of us, we get confused between integrity and competence. When there is a integrity and there is a competence. If there is a competence and integrity, that's the best place to go. That is a blue circle. But real confusion is people, I mean, particularly in India, people are very good in their profession. Highest possible competence, but biggest crooks. And that's where you get stuck. You can't figure out, the company is doing very well, bank is doing very well, but I mean, everybody knows that practices are very bad. And yet the stock is performing because the profits are being shown higher and higher. What do we do in that kind of situation? We are greedy people, so we want to buy them and make money there because they look to be cheap and very easy to make money. So missing out on making money in those corners is the biggest lure. And saying no gives you trouble, and saying yes definitely puts you in trouble. So what do we do? So that's the real spot. We call it competency trap. Competency is there, integrity is not there. If there is no competency and integrity, nobody bothers about them. So basically, and then you have the high competency. So low competency, low integrity, and high integrity but no competency. That is also useless. Then you will get the company. I mean, you get the companies from Tatas and all, like in telecom and all. They have the highest integrity, but the competency was very low. That's why they lost few $1 billion before they closed it. So figuring out these two things is very important in judging a company. The moment you see highest possible integrity and competency, you can statistically check it. That's the place to go. And why management compromise with their integrity? What is that makes them? They're already rich guys. They're very rich guys. Why do they have to tell lies and fudge the books and actually go to the jail finally or leave the country? So why do they do it? So biggest thing is the growth mania. You know, this growth, the obsession with the growth, because growth rewards. I mean, growth is the only thing in the world which gets rewarded blindly. In the stock market, the moment you have 50% growth in the profit or 25% growth for 3 years, the stock just skyrockets. So the mistake is in us. We reward any growth. The moment you print a growth, you see the stock moving. And the reward of growth is far higher than the reward of cost of manufacturing the growth. So the people, I mean, they're all businessmen. They understand what is the reward of what is the reward of manufacturing growth, and hence they go about nothing. Even fudging the books has a cost. I'll explain you that. So when you fudge the books, there is a cost of GST, taxes, whatever, and paying to some officials. So those costs are being borne only because the reward of doing this is very, very profitable. Raising equity capital, all the banks, financial institutions, their ROE is about 15, 17, 18%, 20%. And best of them, they also want to raise capital because they are growing at 25, 30, 40%. So they need continuous drawal of capital from the market. So the higher the price to book, lower is the dilution at their end. So they would always want to keep the books looking very good. Third, compensation look to stock performance. When the senior employees, their own compensation is, many companies have stock performance. If the stock goes by 25%, we will give X amount of bonus or extra compensation. So that also creates problem. ESOPs, there are so many banks who have lured a lot of talented people in their companies by giving a lot of ESOPs, and they are underwater. So when the stock comes down, it creates a lot of stress in the company. They lose that competent people, and so managements try to fudge the books so that the stock price remains there and there is no stress in the ESOP accounting. Using market cap as a currency for acquisition. If you are in a continuous acquisition mode, it's not so prevalent in India, but more recently we have seen some acquisitions which are driven by stock issuance, and there, since stock is used as currency, obviously management is interested in seeing higher prices. Personal wealth enhancement, hello of market cap. If my market cap is $100 billion or $50 billion, I am in the richest possible list. I mean, all the rich guys in the world, they are on the back of their own company's market cap. So who doesn't want to rise up the Fortune or Forbes ranking list from a 50 number to 40 number and 40 number to 20 number. So that particular halo also pushes the companies or managements to show little higher profits. And others like a debt covenants, meeting guidances in this thing. So there are a whole lot of attractions for the managements to fudge the books and show little higher profits. So, and how do they do it? And when does this kind of integrity gets compromised? When board of directors are weak, when there is no entities, there is no forthright guy in the board to stop the top management from acting in particular way, or management team is devoid of checks and balances. Whenever the entrepreneur is very powerful and autocratic, the board of directors will not be able to open their mouth. So in that situation, there is no checks and balances for whatever the top guy wants to do. And third and most risky, and right now it is prevalent big time in India, is auditors lacking objectivity, independence and due diligence. They are supposed to be watchdog on behalf of the shareholders, as well, minority as well as majority. But they are failing. I mean, they are really disappointed in their, anybody can get signed anything. If the big guy is not signing, let's go to the small guy. So you are able to comply, and auditors have not been able to, because they are close to the things. They know what's happening. In most of the cases, they are aware, and still they are not able to bring the attention of minority shareholders to the benefit of minority shareholders. And that allows the management, top management, to get away with the manipulations. So where does management entity reflect? Welcome to the sharp practices. Sharp practices is, what do you mean by sharp practices? Ways of behaving, especially in business, that are dishonest but not illegal. Dishonest but not, it's the bordering, you know. I mean, whether it is legal or illegal. You can, so they will say, management will say it's legal, but you personally feel it's not legal. You have crossed the boundary of legality. But in law, probably they'll win and you will lose out. So there are 4 accounting, see, net profit, to put it simply, is a concept. It's an approximate number. It's not a definite number. It's not a law of physics. What is the number of profit? So it's an approximate number. And and the biggest power God has given to the managements is the accrual accounting. If you do cash accounting, there is no place to manipulate. When you have the accrual accounting, you can keep changing what is the valuation of inventory. You raise the inventory by 100 crores, your profit goes up by 100 crores. You raise the debtors by 100 crores, you can raise the profit by 100 crores. You pay to your creditors little later, reduce the purchase price, and again you can inflate the. So all the accrual, power of accrual gives the management to manipulate the accounts. But good thing is there are a lot of good managements. So there are 4 types of accounting. One is conservative accounting, then you have neutral accounting, you have aggressive accounting, and last is the fraudulent accounting, the intentional fraud. So what happens is that in companies, say like there is a warranty charge of 300 rupees per bike, the provision to be made, and the past experience is that the warranty charge is 250 to 300 rupees. Now conservative guy, he will account 300 rupees per bike warranty charges. Aggressive guy will say 250, sorry, neutral guy will say 250. Aggressive guy will say 125, sorry, aggressive guy will say 250, conservative guy will say 300, but fraudulent guy will say 100 rupees. So the actual warranty cost is going to be 300, but he accounts for only 100 rupees. My quality has gone up so much that I don't need any more warranty charges. So that is the fraudulent, and by doing that, per bike, you could increase the profit by 200 rupees. That's how, you know, between conservative and aggressive. So when you're reading the books, you can figure out whether it is aggressive accounting or conservative accounting. And master accounting entry, I mean, those who are accountants here, I have a lot of friends who are accountant, and the people who read the balance sheet, the master accounting entry is credit P&L and debit balance sheet. So one of the items we pick up in the P&L and credit that, reduce that, whether it is depreciation, whether it is expenses, whether it is increasing the sales, you credit P&L and debit balance sheet in debtors, in inventories, in fixed assets. So we'll talk about it. So this is like a story of 2 characters. I think there was one movie where one character was created with all the godlike of perfect man. So the God said, I will put all the bad elements in another guy. So what managements do, it's like a twin brother. So they put they credit the P&L, and thanks to the double entry system, the equal that financial trash, they put it in the balance sheet. So if you increase the profits by 100 crores, you have to necessarily fudge the balance sheet by 100 crores. And nobody reads the balance sheet. Everybody reads the P&L. If you look at all the analyst community, the earnings, it's 99.9% noise of earnings. Nobody reads the balance sheet. And so in that process, they hide everything in the balance sheet. And what are the common accounting sharp practices? Recording bogus revenue. Like this is the most commonly practiced way to inflate the profit, increase the revenue. I mean, whether it is Satyam. Satyam has done all the frauds, but this one also they have done. But most of the companies, they increase the revenue by some percentage and not increase the associated cost that much, and hence they inflate the profit. Shifting the current expenses to future date, like depreciation. You have 1 lakh crore capitalization and you charge 2% depreciation. You should be charging 10% depreciation. So instead of 10,000 crores, you charge only 2,000 crores. So you are shifting the expenditure on account of depreciation by 8,000 crores per annum into the future. Then recording revenues too soon, like contracting companies. The work completed is 50%, but you account for 60-70% of the work completed in your books. So there are various ways. You'll see, because of lack of time or maybe paucity of examples, we have seen all these things in specific companies, but I am not at liberty to put their names out here because it might be wrong on my part to say that this company practiced like this. Because it's not certified, they are fraudulent. But I know they're bordering the fraudulent, aggressive accounting and fraud. Boosting income using one-time activities. There is a profit on sale of assets. Now, profit on sale of assets is fine, but you can adjust it in this quarter or this year or that year. So, depending on what you need, you are able to do that. Then sharp practices using during acquisition. Acquisition is the biggest part of, it is more prevalent in America, but in India also, through acquisitions, you can hide a lot of problems. Satyam actually tried to hide the problem of 5,000 crores missing cash by acquiring Mitas, that real estate company, and pay it in the, that fudge cash. They wanted to use it as a currency to buy Mitas into Satyam and finish off all the problem. But somehow it didn't go through, and Ramlinga Raju had to confess everything. So the acquisitions is a big problem, and then taking off the balance sheet. Contingent liability is the biggest source of hiding a lot of problems of the main balance sheet into contingent liabilities. So we have two cases. I don't know whether it is in the book it is given in detail. Here there are two cases where we have tried to explain you. In case number 1, when sales is increased by 200 rupees, and in the second where R&D expenses is capitalized by 200 rupees. So what happens is that when you increase the sales by 200 rupees, your profits go up from say 38 to 188 after taxes and things like that. And in R&D expenditure, the impact is same, but in balance sheet, the impact is very different. In balance sheet, what happens is that at one place data goes up, and other place the capitalization fixed assets go up. And in cash flow, the real dramatic effect is in the cash flow. In first one, when you increase the sales and debtors, you can catch it in operating cash flow. And most of the inquiry ends over there. I personally never used to go beyond that. But in R&D expenditure capitalization, that is the ultimate mastery of fudging the accounts. You debit the fixed assets and credit the P&L. And how do you do it? All the operating expenses you capitalize and put it into the fixed assets. When you do that, what happens? Like R&D expenditure, we have $500 million of every year R&D expenditure. You get 150% deduction, and conveniently you can capitalize that because the benefits of that is going to come in years to come. So when you capitalize that, what happens is your operating cash flow is up, profit is up, operating cash flow is up, and you are hidden forever. And further, you can actually have a very bad depreciation policy and actually transfer into P&L, keep the profit enhanced for very long time to come. And whenever some one-time gain happens, you can write off the whatever you want to write off. So this is how bulk of the manipulations are being done. This is how we explain the depreciation. See, depreciation, in fact, in this study I realized that this is one of the most sinister way of fudging the books. And in India we have funny ways of, taxation accounts are different and corporate accounts are different. So you get the tax break in the tax accounts irrespective of how much you are charging in the Schedule 6 accounts which are given to the minority shareholders. So here, if you change, there are two things you can change the depreciation. One, the useful life of the assets from 10 to 15 years. And the residual value, which I never realized that could also be part of, manipulating the accounts. If residual value, you change the years of useful life of the assets from 10 to 15 and residual value from 5 to 10, you can effectively reduce the depreciation charge per year by 40%. And that, so to the extent of decline in the depreciation, your PAT goes up, or PBT at least goes up. So, and that can be a very large number in capital intensive industries. So now here the difficult part comes where we have tried to be very cautious and we have tried to write about few companies. And this is one which is written and out and down and out and certified and closed. So this one, and this is the only case in the books worldwide, this is being mentioned. So this is the one international quality manipulation from India, Satyam. So here they, actually, as the story goes, they say that he did it, the incentive was to build real estate empire in Hyderabad. That was the incentive for him to fudge the accounts. So what he did, he increased the revenue, he increased the profits. We used to think that he fudged it because he was competing with Infosys. Infosys was having 25% margin and he had about 7-8% margin. So he used to show false sales, false profits, and hence the cash balance, which was about 5,000-6,000 crores, it was just not there. And we never believed, we never thought that cash would not be there. So I think probably this is the only company which has fudged the cash itself, which is only, Satyam could do it so far. So credit goes to them, and this is how it worked out. Till 2008, they had everything going. Then they declared, you have seen the wholesale losses. Suddenly they'll manipulate for 5, 7, 10 years, and then suddenly now this number is 8,000 crores in 2009 for Satyam. Nowadays numbers are running at about 25,000 crores. Any company which admits their mistake, they come out with one quarterly entry of 25,000 crore loss. So this is basically nothing but all the all the mistakes or all the fudging, they want to clear it in one shot. So it's about 9,000 crores. The net worth came down from 7,200 crores to literally nothing, and cash balance, which was about 5,000 crores, became literally zero. So this was the entire fraud, and the stock went from about 600 rupees to literally zero. It was raised to zero. Manpasan, we are also one of the victims of this, and here the modus operandi was very sophisticated, and even auditors, they couldn't figure out for say 10-15 years. They overstated the revenue and profits. So they fudged the debtors, they fudged the inventory, they fudged the sales, and they fudged the capex also. So they used all the 3-4 methods of manipulating, and they finally, the members of the family, they went to the jail. And I don't know, from the equity capital of this, good thing was they didn't have the borrowings from the banks. So all the money was from the equity holders. So I don't know, they lost so much of money in this process that they didn't have 20 crores to get those 2 sons released from the jail. And the stock went from 400 to literally nothing. This again raised to zero. So these, this entire process of manipulating is like riding the tiger. You just cannot get off it, because every year the problem becomes bigger and bigger. Educom Solutions, the sharp practice. Here again, you know, that they were extending computers and digital boards to the schools on an installment basis, but that is fine. What was the business practice? But the way they were doing the accounting was very, very aggressive and almost bordering the fraudulence. I mean, it is not right for me to say it was fraudulent, but clearly they were knowing that it is very aggressive accounting because they were brilliant guys. And finally, they couldn't sustain. Every single year there was a negative free cash flow, a large amount. And I know Ramesh and ourselves, we were knowing about this even when the stock was at the top. And we said this is not sustainable and it's almost bordering the fraud. And finally, in 2 years, the whole thing collapsed. And again, the stock from a high of 1,000 became literally nothing and got delisted. So in financial sector, which is very difficult, and one of the thing is financial sector money and the product is same. So it is very difficult to figure out because the form of the entire transaction doesn't change. It remains in money only. So how do you figure out all this cash flow issue? There's no cash flow fungibility. There's a full fungibility in the cash flow. So upfronting income and amortizing expenses. This has been the last 10 years one of the biggest way of capitalizing the upfronting a lot of fees in the transactions and amortizing expenses very slowly. Faulty recognition of bad assets. I think you have 6% or 4% gross NPA and you recognize only 1%. Rest all you keep grinning it at the last week of the March. So that has been the, even now there must be some more, but bulk of the troubles in PSU banks and some more private sector banks that has happened is this one. Then problem of large, when you give large ticket loans of 5, 10, 20,000 crores. So one is that you have the collateral but no liquidity. So when you default, the collateral is of no use. Actually bank is holding a lot of collateral but no liquidity, and hence after 90 days the account becomes NPA and creates all kinds of mess in the bank's books. And then organizational structural issues like not having proper organizational structure of credit and sales separated. So all those kind of things create problem. But in the books, the biggest thing is the bad loan accounting and upfronting of the fees or recognizing a lot more profit or revenue upfront. I mean, these are two big ones which, I mean, if you have a little sharper eyes, you know the management, I think you can figure out. Then you have the non-accounting sharp practices. Related party transactions. There are a lot of families, they use the company as their own kind of a backyard and supply a lot of services to the company, and you don't know whether those services are happening at arm's length. So these related party transactions are becoming big menace in recent times. Actually, Indigo has raised a lot of objections to the related party transaction, though the transactions are very small, but still related party transactions are becoming a big source of trouble. So one has to be, as a minority shareholder, one has to be looking at these transactions. And misleading earnings guidance or lack of guidance. So this is also, in a way, there are a lot of managements I know of, very reputed ones. They end up pushing the stock price by giving aggressive guidance. Probably they don't know also that maybe they're innocent in giving that, but not knowing for sure this is what is going to be the earnings, and yet they guide, and people get carried away and buy into the stock, and finally they suffer. And implications and impact of sharp practices. What really happens? So one of the things is, it is extremely easy to fudge P&L. Profit and loss account is easy to manipulate, but cash flow is very difficult to manipulate. There is a huge financial cost of higher GST and income tax, and with the MAT, so the fudging is not cheap. It is expensive, and still managements carry out because the reward of fudging is far higher than cost of fudging. And at times the cost has to be borne by borrowing more. Apart from fudging, you have to actually pay your way by paying taxes or GST. You have to borrow and sustain these operations, and that's what really happened in Manpasan. And trouble compounds every year. So you fudge it by 50 crores this year, another 50 years, another 50, but second year you have to do 50 plus 50. So to show 50 crores ride over first year, you have to do 100 crores worth of fudging. So really, the tiger, the difficulty index keeps rising as the year passes, and in the end, it is raised to zero. Finally, nothing goes successfully. The management keeps hoping there will be one-time gain and we'll clean it up, and that never comes. And finally, these companies, they succumb to kind of a failure. So investors need to have sharp forensic mind for looking at these kind of managements, for finding the loopholes. Then other thing is the auditor's report. Other checks on management integrity is auditor's report, frequent top management changes, independent directors resigning and those kind of things, or CFO resigning every 6 months, 1 year. And then promoters pledge shares. I mean, this last 12 months has been disaster for the market, because these promoters, they have pledged their shares. Obviously, they want stock price to go up so that they can sell some portion of it and can deplace their shares. So that's also a big problem. And then 360-degree feedback from customers, employees, suppliers, and competitors. So I think this is the most powerful one, that you go and ask the constituents, whether ex-employees, competition, trade. Trade has the best knowledge of what's happening in the company. And then, of course, the suppliers to the same company, they would tell you what is the quality of payments or things coming out. So all this you have to do to arrive at the moment of management integrity. What is most important is, how do you find, I mean, all these crooks, if you can find them, very good. But if you can't find them, you don't have to worry too much about them. What you have to worry about is the 20-25 companies you are buying. So it is much easier to find honest companies than trying to avoid all the dishonest companies. And how do you go about finding the honest companies? So you have to keep doing that forensic check. So you have to have forensic mindset and arrive. Don't buy the stocks till you arrive at moment of management integrity. Somebody, some person of your confidence will come and say, sir, this company is the finest company. There is no competency check is yours, but the company has unquestionable integrity. So till you arrive at that, don't get into the stock. And if by chance you are in the stock, so this is the biggest, if you are in the stock and you find the management is pursuing sharp practices. So Thomas Phelps says, the best defense against fraudster is to run away from them as fast as possible at the first hint of sharp practices. With more than 50,000 different stocks available to investors in this country, that is in America, it is not only unnecessary but downright stupid to buy into a company run by men of doubtful integrity. So this is the only way you can save yourself. Stay away from these guys the moment you realize that there is sharp practice. So at the end, I would say, conclusion, in equity investing, management is 90%, industry 9%, and 1% is everything else. Hence, getting management integrity right is the critical first step. There is only one way of writing honest accounts, but millions of ways of writing manipulated accounts. Most sharp practices are to inflate profits and stuff the financial trash in the balance sheet. That is debit balance sheet, credit P&L. Profit and loss statement is easier to manipulate. Hence, management must be statutorily asked to present a simplified free cash flow statement. This free cash flow statement is available nowhere. You go in, we are trying to get C-line improved. They have the cash flow statement. But owner's cash flow, free cash flow, what is attributable to shareholders, that is not available anywhere. So neither it is requirement of Schedule 6, nor it is there in any of the packages. So if you don't get to see it, then you literally don't use it. So we are suggesting that this kind of free cash flow statement should be given, and management must also give explanation why there is no free cash flow, where the money has gone. Auditors must be made more accountable to minority shareholders to avoid sharp practices by the management. As an investor, have a forensic mindset. This is very important. As an investor, have a forensic mindset to get management's explanation for all the sharp practices. Finally, interact with various stakeholders, customers, employees, suppliers, competitors, etc. Till you arrive at moment of management integrity, which is most important in judging quality of management. Thank you very much.